STL, Apocalyptic Past, Toxic Legacy by Emily Inken Bretnery for Aaron von Steuben at Purdue Global University. When people think of St. Louis, they are often reminded of Budweiser or the championship St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, Nelly's Country Grammar, and the giant silver arch that sways in the wind. What most people don't associate with St. Louis is its checkered past, spent dabbling in toxic nuclear weapons waste during the Manhattan Project. Scientist Robert Alvarez goes on to write, "This nuclear weapons waste was not at one time regarded as dangerous by government agencies and the corporations involved. Residents have noticed that the negligence of mitigating and proper storage of that waste over the years has significantly affected their health. Thousands of these residents today have fallen ill to cancers, tumors, and other autoimmune illnesses due to low-dose radiation the legacy waste has continued to emit over time. The parties responsible have been downplaying health risk and possible deaths that the nuclear weapons waste causes, while independent tests and research prove to the residents otherwise. The now defunct Atomic Energy Commission, whose past pet weapons projects are now overseen by the U.S. Department of Energy, in conjunction with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, FUSRAP, which stands for Formerly Utilized Sites Remedial Action Program, as well as Mallinckrodt Chemical and Republic Services, are the agencies and parties responsible. They are responsible for remediating of past negligence and illegal dumping of the toxic waste. The EPA, FUSRAP, and DOE are the parties tasked with cleaning up the area, including groundwater and soil. They are also responsible for buying out residences and businesses that cannot be remediated and should extend downwinders protections for medical expenses of residents affected by present or future illnesses caused or worsened by low-level radiation exposure. And also importantly, policymakers and administrators should abide by the residents' concerns, rather than continuing to downplay the dangerous effects of low-level radioactivity. The Atomic Energy Commission hired Dr. Thomas Mancuso in 1965 to study cancer risk associated with low-level radiation within the population of the Mallinckrodt employees. Mancuso enlisted the help of Dr. Alice Stewart, and she was a great help because she was the first researcher to find that radiation on pregnant women significantly increased birth defects. Mancuso's study of Mallinckrodt chemical employees had also correlated with the increased risk of cancer found at Hanford, Washington by Dr. Samuel Milham. After explaining to the Atomic Energy Commission about the dangers of low-level radiation, the AEC fired Dr. Mancuso. That did not stop Dr. Mancuso. He kept working on the studies of the Mallinckrodt employees anyway. He even called upon scientist Robert Alvarez for help. His firing led to the government trying to seize Dr. Mancuso's data, but he had held on to it. Upon replacement of Dr. Mancuso, the AEC destroyed other records from a study of hospital patients who worked for a gaseous diffusion plant in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Now, years later, Alvarez writes about a sub-smoldering event at the nearby Republic Services Bridgeton landfill. Noxious odors fill the air as pre-existing radioactive soil within the landfill heats. The Bridgeton landfill subsmoldering event rolls toward Westlake landfill, which is just a quarry away, making it a literal hotspot for retired legacy waste. Some residents and independent scientists believe this will one day serve as a catalyst to nuclear fallout. Today, the EPA, Mallinckrodt Chemical Corporation, in conjunction with FUSRAP, and Republic Trash Removal Services are the parties responsible for remediating of past negligence and illegal dumping of the toxic waste. Republic Trash Removal Services assumed liability once they purchased the Westlake neighboring landfill in Bridgeton. The waste removal company has been under fire with lawsuits filed due to the negligence of the U.S. government and Mallinckrodt Chemicals nuclear waste that has ended up in the landfill they acquired. The EPA has gone on record to say that they have tested for the alpha, beta, and gamma radiation at Westlake neighboring Bridgeton landfill. But in 2016, they only tested soil samples from Bridgeton landfill's exterior and merely took an interior testing of dust samples. The EPA had then sent those samples off to their own lab to test for radioactive material remnants from the Cold War. Their results came back as normal and not corresponding to the Manhattan Project's nuclear weapons legacy waste. These organizations all sided with Republic Services and the EPA's claims that the final readings were normal. This includes the CDC, the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Missouri Department of Natural Resources. These gaslighting tactics displeased the residents. A Finney law office in St. Louis gave a geyser counter to a Westlake group, Just Moms STL, which allowed them to conduct independent readings. Republic Services rebutted and claimed the law office was just there to jostle and disorient the residents. While the EPA claimed they were finished at the Bridgeton landfill. The plights of the residents grabbed the attention of scientists Caltifin, Alvarez, and Hickson as they conducted a radioactive particulate matter study in St. Louis, Missouri, of area surface soils and house dust from the closest house less than a half a mile away from Bridgeton Westlake site. Their study tested samples taken from indoors of the house and dust from the house's basement, which they located on load-bearing and inaccessible beams. Scientists Caltifin, Alvarez, and Hickson concluded that the house dust and the material detected was the same leftover waste from Mallinckrodt uranium refining processing. These same scientists claim the radioactive dust they found is a catalyst for these life-threatening illnesses contracted by residents. In a reply to the proposed plan for the Westlake landfill radioactive waste, K. Dre wrote, "The Westlake reports contain significant monitoring incongruities regarding the quantities and location of these dangerous materials." She goes on to ask, would this fact not justify additional testing of soil and water samples by a team of scientists with no financial stake in the test results? And K. Dre there was totally calling out the lobbying. In 2022 alone, $110,000 has been put into lobbying for Republic Services in the first quarter of the year. In year 2021, they lobbied with well over $420,000. And in years 2020 and 2019, they lobbied Washington with more than $560,000 each year. Now this year, in 2022, back in March, The EPA says the radioactive waste in the landfill was way worse than what they had thought before. After the EPA made this statement regarding the more radioactive waste discovered, it is assumed that testing and retesting keeps stalling the EPA's $205 million cleanup efforts. The EPA has listed names of possible parties responsible for funding the cleanup efforts, but the mayor of St. Louis just thinks this will cause for further litigations that will continue to stall the cleanup efforts. For residents living near Coldwater Creek, it is said that an alarming 2,700 people are ill, and some neighbors can claim a death toll on their street as high as 21 people. The contaminated Coldwater Creek, which runs near botched storage of leaking chemical drums located at their St. Louis airport site, but residents still unclear of how contaminated this area is after decades. Coldwater Creek was contaminated when radioactive material was hauled from downtown site to the St. Louis airport site beginning in 1946. The same material was then purchased from the U.S. government for use by a private corporation 20 years later. There was value in the remaining material after the Belgian Congo U-235 was removed for the purpose of manufacturing nuclear weapons. The private corporation moved the material north of the St. Louis airport site to Laddie Avenue in Hazelwood, which also neighbors Coldwater Creek. These remnants were illegally dumped at Westlake Landfill in 1973 without the permission from the government. In comments to the proposed plan for the Westlake Landfill, K. Dre wrote, "The St. Louis Airport and Laddie Avenue sites are responsible for the contamination of Coldwater Creek, which runs all the way to the Missouri River." This creek is also known to flood during heavy rains and takes radioactive material into nearby homes and is affecting nearby schools and the health of the students, teachers, and parents. In fact, Coldwater Creek is still reading high levels, which has caused Cori Bush to pursue a federal review regarding its cleanup. Some of this nuclear waste that was once not considered a threat has ended up in places where it shouldn't and is harmful for most all beings exposed. Questions are now being raised as to what is taking the Army Corps Foods Wrap team so long to mitigate and remediate, and where the millions of dollars have gone, if not toward the Manhattan Project's waste cleanup effort. Meanwhile, residents of the affected Coldwater Creek and Bridgeton Westlake landfill are falling catastrophically ill, and some would appreciate remediation efforts like a Superfund buyout of their properties. Some are requesting for immediate remedial efforts to clean and mitigate the waste so they can continue living there in their family homes. Because low-level radiation can more than likely cause illnesses like cancer to become fatal over time, all the residents and their families should have downwinders protections extended to them to monitor their health going forward.